Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the North Sydney Local Planning Panel of November. The panel this afternoon has only two agenda items. We have one public meeting item and we have one other item. The public meeting item is one where there has been more than 10 objections, and this particular property at 1 Baden Road, Carrabba Point, qualifies in this regard. We, the panel, have had the opportunity of reading all the assessment reports, and also we have all individually undertaken site inspections due to the COVID restrictions. Fortunately, that may end very soon, we hope. So I do welcome you all to this meeting this afternoon, and the process is that we hear from submitters and objectors to development applications, and then I ask the applicants team of architects, planners to respond to those issues they've heard, and also to answer any questions from the panel at that time. As I said, the panel has also filled out conflict of interest forms, and I will ask each panel member when they introduce themselves to identify if they have any conflicts of interest with the two matters on the agenda. I will briefly introduce myself, Jan Morell, and I have been the chair of this panel since its inception. We have other members here this afternoon, and I'll ask them to give you their background. In summary, I retired from full-time work some 10 years ago, and since that time I only sit or chair on independent planning panels, both state and at local government level. I am a town planner of some 40 years. My last position was as a full-time commissioner with the Land and Environment Court for 14 years. I have no conflicts of interest, and I'll now move to David Logan to introduce himself, an expert independent member.
Hi everyone, I'm a director of GML Heritage. I work part-time as a heritage consultant. My background is in architecture and planning and heritage and urban planning, and I've previously worked for the Heritage Council and sat on the Heritage Council for 9 years, and I sit on a number of other planning panels and the State Design Review Panel, and I'm quite familiar with North Sydney, living in Willoughby.
And any conflict, David?
No conflicts, no.
Thank you. Brendan Randalls.
Hello, my name's Brendan Randalls. I'm an architect. I'm new to this panel. I'm on quite a few planning panels, including Wollongong, City of Sydney and Randwick. I'm also on quite a lot of design review panels. I'm a designer. I'm an architectural designer, so I design quite a lot of large apartment buildings, and urban designer as well. And I don't have any conflicts, Jan, with the matters today.
And Kenneth Robinson?
Yes, I'm Ken Robinson. I was an environmental scientist and planner for some 30 years until I retired, and I sit on this panel as a community representative. And I'm a resident in North Sydney, and I have no conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Ken. Very well. So I have a number of people who wish to address the panel in respect of the dwelling house proposed for 1 Baden Road, Carrabba Point. And I have the applicant here, Anthony El Hazzouri. Yes, thank you. Ian Cady, town planner. Thank you. Yep. And Jane Mays Riley, urban designer, and Nicola Giorardi.
Yes, good afternoon.
Thank you. And do I have any objectors on the line? I don't have you listed here. Oh, I have Chris Shaw, a submitter.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Mr. Shaw, are you representing parties or?
Yes, I'm representing the owners of units 1, 2 and 7, 200 Carrabba Point, 200 Carrabba Road, Carrabba Point.
Right, and are you a solicitor or
I am a solicitor, yes.
You are, okay. You actually need special leave to.
I request that. We put the submission in yesterday and I formally request that leave to speak on behalf of the owners of Unit 1, 2 and 7 today.
Right, very well. And are you not raising legal issues as such?
Now, I'm talking on two issues. There is a height non-compliance, which I'll be talking to the members of the panel about,
Yep.
and I'll be talking about the view impacts of
Right.
the proposed development as well.
Okay.
They are the two issues.
On those grounds, I will give you, grant you leave to appear before the panel. So
Thank you,
thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. Shall I commence,
You should,
Madam Chair?
you
Thank you.
certainly may, yes. And just you better identify again the units.
All right, so Chris Shaw is my name, a solicitor, and I'm representing the owners of Units 1, 2 and 7 at 200 Carrabba Road. I would like to, if it's available, share my screen. Is that acceptable?
Yes, we can arrange for that.
Thank you.
Peter, is that possible for you to give permission for Mr. Shaw to share his screen?
All right, so I'll just click on that and hopefully allow you to see.
I don't know where, I'll just check that we've got the facility to allow you to share. Robin, is Peter there? Yes, we can't hear you very well there. Peter, yes.
Yeah, you can share the screen.
I can't see a share screen, no.
Right.
He's got to share it from his screen, from his end.
Okay, dealing with that now. I'm just, if you bear with me, I'll try and work this through. There we are. And share. And hopefully.
Yes, thank you.
Can you see there?
We can see the assessment report, which you
Okay.
can actually just refer to the pages. That would assist.
All right. I was hoping I could share a screen, but it looks like I can only share specific documents. But I will move between a number of documents as I go and just identify them for you, because I understand, yes, you do have the assessment report.
You do have
the and a number of other documents.
I would like you to just refer to the page numbers as such.
Yes, I'll do that for you.
Thank you.
So the first issue that I want to talk to you about is the height non-compliance. And
okay. Do you want to take off the share screen, because we all have that in our report?
No, I don't, if you don't mind, because I do want to take you to a number of other documents as well. And I've highlighted some areas that I want to emphasise for you. So particularly in the height non-compliance, there is, as the members of the panel are aware, there's a development standard of 8.5 metres, and in this case we have an exceedance of 0.6 of a metre. And the page that I'm sharing with you is the height provision, which talks about, in the control, which talks about the objectives of heights of buildings in the area. And I've highlighted for you 3 of those areas, A, B and F, for you to consider. The first one is the conforming provision with the surrounding area. The second is promoting the retention of, and if appropriate, sharing of existing views. That's B. And F is encouraging appropriate scale and density. 2, of course, just sets out the exceedance of the maximum height shown on the land. So this is telling us that there's going to be a height requirement set out in 2 of 8.5 metres, and for all of the above objectives, this objective of meeting the 8.5 metres is set out. Now we know that there's a 0.6 of a metre exceedance on this, and a clause 4.6 objection has been put in to try and justify that exceedance. Unfortunately, the proposal at the moment exceeds its height limit not through necessity, but by way of architectural design. And that is why the building currently exceeds the height limit. I propose to the panel that a design feature has no place in justifying a development standard exceedance, and the proposal should be asked to be amended or rejected on this basis alone. To do otherwise, of course, promotes a design feature over development standards and encourages non-compliance with such standards. And that's, of course, how precedents are set this way. I don't need to remind the panel, particularly Madam Chair, of what the Chief Judge said in the Land Environment Court, that's Peter McClellan in Stockland and Manly. Also, I note Mr. Katie's in the audience. He was, of course, town planner in that matter, about the consistency in the application of development standards, that a non-consistent application is a matter to be considered in determining whether such a standard should be altered in the future. So to be able to give consent.
I just want to remind you at this point, Mr. Shaw, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. All right.
So, but I just wanted to remind you because we need to move on to the next point as well.
I
Yes.
appreciate the 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So moving along then, I'll therefore a new share for you on, I beg your pardon. I just want to go to now page 5 of that same report for you and show that it's acknowledged that the proposed development will result, they say, in improved sight lines and views for some residents in the neighbouring dwellings. Unfortunately, that's the extent of it, because it doesn't take into account in this document the impacts, the detrimental impacts on units 1, 2 and 7, which are of course the lower units in at 200 Carrabba Road. And the fact that they're saying that the proposed dwelling will likely result in improved sight lines and views for some residents in neighbouring dwellings, unfortunately ignores those dwellings that are detrimentally impacted. And in that regard, the 4.6 objection relies upon 2 documents prepared by Urbis, a view sharing advice and an analysis. And I'd like to go to those documents to be able to show you the, unfortunately, material in there that has missed what is a particularly important
Would you like
consideration,
to
which is...
refer to it, Mr. Shaw?
I beg your pardon?
Would you wish to just refer to it, because we all do have the documents and we are aware of, so you can just refer us to the page numbers.
All right then. So if we go to the view sharing analysis, and we know at page 3, it says that Urbis has not had the opportunity to conduct field work and inspect views with respect to this proposal. Now, that's very disturbing that a development of this size and impact is relying upon advice where Urbis say at page 3 of their view sharing analysis that they have not had the opportunity to conduct field work and inspect views. At page 4, they say that an assessment against tenacity is not warranted. Let me just share it for you so that you can see me. So at page 4, they say an assessment against tenacity is not warranted and that there's no blockage of views that are highly valued. But of course, we know, and you would have seen from your inspections, and we know from the council officer's report, that the actual views are of some iconic features. And then the assessment that must be carried out is whether those iconic features are detrimentally impacted or not. And there are some tests that are set out, of course, by Senior Commissioner Roseth, your old colleague, Madam Chair, who set out in tenacity a certain series of tests. But unfortunately, the experts supposedly who are providing advice to the applicant have determined that an assessment against tenacity is not warranted because they say that there is no blockage of views and they say that they are not highly valued. That's at page 4 of the view sharing analysis. Further at page 4, the Urbis report says that the development is fully compliant with controls that are relevant to view loss, including height. Now, clearly that's not the case. Clearly that's not the case because we have a 4.6 variation that goes to heights as well. So there has been some inconsistency in the material put before the council officer who is writing the report, and to actually say that the views, to actually say that it is fully compliant with controls that are relevant to view loss, including height, at page 4 is totally misleading. We're also told in the report that the incursions into the views are minor. What we're not told, of course, is that those incursions into views are brought about by design features in the architecture. And of course, the court's been quite clear on that situation, that views should not be eroded in situations where a better design would not erode such views. And in this situation, design features of the proposed development are detrimental to the principles of view sharing. And notwithstanding council officer's assessment, notwithstanding the applicant's position that the height of the building doesn't impact on the views, we know that the height of the building is contrary to the controls and does impact on the views. And if you just look at page 10 of the clause 4.6 variation, you will see the height blanket, and you will see that in that height blanket there are the exceedances. You can see the design features exceeding through that height blanket, including chimneys and tops of roofs. And my submission is that alone such design should not be tolerated. So on the basis that the Urbis reports fail to assess the view loss impacts to Unit 1, Unit 2 and Unit 7 at 200 Grava, and as a minimum it would be expected that a proper view analysis would have been undertaken, and to verify the impact on views, some height poles to be erected so that the neighbouring properties who are impacted can actually get an identification of those impacts. I say that the height development standard should be complied with, and the views of the neighbours should not be detrimentally impacted because of bad design, and hence, without amendment, the proposal should be rejected. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We don't have any other people. I just want to check, are there any other people online who wish to make a submission or an objection to this development? No, everyone's silent. So thank you, Mr. Shaw. You have been representing the 3 owners of number 200 Carrabba Road, and we hear what you have to say there. I will ask the applicant's team to respond to your issues as well as address the panel on the application itself. So I'm in your hands, Mr. Cady, as to who you wish to lead your team, or if you all wish to participate, but please let me know which order of I should.
Thank you, Chair. Anthony Zuri, our client, I think will speak first, followed by myself, Urbis and the architect, but we don't all intend giving a full 5-minute presentation each. We'll just touch on a few matters each.
Right here. Well, you did hear me say I'd like you to respond to Mr. Shaw's.
Yes, certainly, and we'll focus on Mr. Shaw's issues.
Thank you very much. So can I invite Mr. El Hazzouri?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm assuming you can hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Unmuted. Thank you. So obviously we'd like to thank the council officers for the report. In its totality, we obviously agree with the contents, and it was an extremely thorough report, which is the byproduct of over a year worth of design development, both at pre-DA and then during the subsequent development application process. In relation to a couple of the issues, I do have, I guess I want to address the panel on potentially later. There's 2 conditions in the proposed privacy conditions at C25, C and D. But apart from that, the remainder of the conditions are acceptable to the applicant. The questions in terms of our team, Ian Caddy from Planning, Jane Mays-Riley on view loss, and Nicola Garati, the architect, the project architect, are all here to answer questions. I will put it to, I believe, in terms of Mr. Shaw's issues, I think would probably be the best part to start. I think it would be good if Ian started off in relation to the height matter, and then Jane can address the panel on the view loss and how that was assessed. So I think both were done with quite a lot of information behind them. So Ian, if you want to start off in relation to the height issue.
Yes, and Mr. Shaw commenced with a discussion of the objectives, and I think quite appropriately so. They are the relevant tests of a clause 4.6 variation request. Going to those objectives, there is reflecting natural landforms and other matters. That is the large, in large part, the reason for variation of the height limit. As the existing building varies the height limit, the site has quite atypical and very steep topography and quite irregular that makes any meaningful response inevitably have minor tweaks outside that are offset by other areas that are well below the height plane. You know, is a common matter in dealing with height on steep and irregular slopes. The design does indeed reflect the landform and does so to a greater degree than the existing design. There is an existing building on the site, and this current design pulls that back and better reflects the landform. Before I go on to the other objectives, Mr. Shaw referred to the design features being objected to. These design features are part of providing a quality architectural response that is contextual to the unusual circumstances of the site. And indeed, I agree that if those design features of themselves manifest in any particular impact, such as view loss, then that would be a question that would need to be responded to. But I'll leave that to Jane to talk to the actual view loss impacts. But on the accepting Jane's analysis, there is no material view loss occurring. To remove architectural design features for crude compliance would be contrary to the intent of various planning considerations. It would only be where they manifest in an impact, which we say they do not. The objective F, appropriate scale and density, the nature of the elements that project above the height limit do not go to the scale or the density of the development. In fact, they are aesthetic features that break down the scale of what is admittedly a large building for a single dwelling, but as it's entitled to be. But those arched roof forms go some way to breaking down that scale, particularly as viewed from the water, and are thereby directly consistent with the objective of providing an appropriate scale response. In terms of density, there is no gross floor area within any of the subject elements, and so they do not increase the gross floor area, the yield, the number of bedrooms, anything like that, so the density is not a consideration. With regard to the question of inspection, I'll maybe leave that to Jane, but noting that that has been an issue in COVID and in the time frame in which we were requested to do this analysis, internal inspections of other dwellings was not an option. So in terms of the WEBE test of consistency with the objectives, I think in terms particularly of the objectives that Mr. Shaw raised, no material issues arise. And I think given that the current proposal reduces the height, the site setbacks and the site coverage of the existing dwelling on the site, the only material issue remaining is view impact. And we have a specialist expert on that, so I'll defer to Jane. The only point I would note is that we took a somewhat conservative approach with our clause 4.6 by addressing the chimney. Now, if you look to the definition of building height, chimneys, flues and the like are specifically excluded. To avoid debate on that matter, I think that is squarely a chimney and therefore excluded from height. However, to avoid any discussion of what is a chimney, we've included it. But it is not a feature that materially causes view loss. And so I would say that the clause 4.6 is well founded and results in no material adverse consequence, and may be passed, unless the panel have any questions of me, passed to Jane to discuss view loss.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maisie Riley.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chris, for your comments. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, great. There's a few things I think I need to address. So firstly, the initial report, it is referred to as a preliminary view sharing advice. Preliminary in fact that we were not able to gain access to individual dwellings to inspect individual views. And on that basis, all the fieldwork was done from external locations along the street in detail, looking at spatial relationship between all of the neighbouring buildings, including number 3 and the units at number 200, Carrabba Road. So we did have a very thorough look at those. We also interrogate internal floor plans of individual units to try and get an idea of what windows are available and what views in which directions are available, etc. So we consider the floor plan internally. And based on the relationship of the site, which is significantly lower, and the proposed built form, which is almost exactly the same as what's currently existing on the site, we determined that really at the preliminary stage, there was no real need to go in and try and gain access, notwithstanding COVID issues. And that's because I think the people that you represent on level 1, which is a lower ground unit at the, I think it's the east side, and the other units, which are included in the planning officer's report, it's very unlikely, it's sort of an unreasonable to be able to expect to retain all views from a ground level unit when a 2-storey building is quite permissible in front of it. So that's one issue to consider. As to your other points about view loss and what's lost in the view, it was my opinion that the amount of undifferentiated water in the foreground was really quite minor and negligible, and it is not considered an iconic view. The wider view, of course, includes individual icons, and the wider view, if considered holistically, would be considered an iconic view, but the part of the view loss is most certainly not. So in my opinion, not only is, as per step 25, the preamble in tenacity at paragraph 25, where he alludes to whether there's a loss of great quantity or quality. If that's not actually going to occur, then really there's no reason to apply the planning principle. So in my opinion, looking at having visited the site and been inside the site, looked at the relationship between the two, in my mind there was no need to apply that even from a conservative basis, given that a minor to negligible amount of open water in the foreground of the view would be lost. All of the predominant character of the view, the iconic elements in the view, really the extensive and expansive wide view remains almost exactly the same, with an extremely minor amount of built form at the arched roof form, causing a minor view loss. So that's the reason that in the modelled view prepared by the architects that we did not apply the planning principle. So I think I've covered the fact we did actually go to the site. We didn't go inside the dwellings, as I've described, and that is why it's called a preliminary advice. But having said that, we did do a lot of research and analysis to assure ourselves that any potential view loss would be really quite minor, which is the conclusion we came to, and which is also the conclusion supported by Council's report, which I think is very thorough and reasonable and objective. I think that might be the crux of your issues. I just would like to say about tenacity also, it's difficult to simply rely on one view from one room in the dwelling when tenacity to do a proper assessment requires you to inspect all rooms and all possible views available from the dwelling, including those that are not affected. So we haven't had that chance to see all the views that are also not affected. But looking at floor plans, we determined that there were other views that would not be affected, and therefore that's a downweight to the overall view sharing impact. So that's another reason why overall we discount the potential view loss as being anything other than minor. And if it's, in my opinion, as it's minor, it's quite supportable, and it does represent a reasonable view sharing outcome. So those are my responses to Mr. Shaw. Thank you.
Can I just ask panel members if they have any questions to date?
No, I don't.
No? Okay, then we'll keep them for the end. So I'll just make one comment. Whilst you said there was no need for a tenacity test, I'm just trying to understand. But then we ended, but at the end of the day, Mr. Cady provided us with a clause 4.6. And we have had, and we do have a tenacity test. I'm just trying to understand, because often the practice would be you do the tenacity test irrespective, as opposed to a preliminary reasoning as to why it is not necessary. So I'm just trying to understand.
Madam Chair, would you like me to inform you as to the reasoning why that's the standard principle or standard application?
Or I'm happy to also answer
Yeah, I
the
think
why not.
I'm just asking, yes, because as my experience would generally tend to tell me that you might end up with a tenacity test which says, yes, there's no unreasonable impacts, etc., for all the reasons, and many of them that you've perhaps stated in this case. But don't you normally formally go through that process? I guess at the end of the day, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
what you're suggesting is correct, because you're referring to.
Yeah, can I just say this? We're not in court here. This is to allow the applicant to respond to.
I beg your pardon. I thought you were asking generally for the
No, I'm
principles
not.
based upon
It's not
Oxton Park and Liverpool. All right.
it's not a town hall debate, but I need to understand the principles of where they were coming from. Thank you.
All
Yes.
right. I'm sure Jane Mayers.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you. Well, look, I might just quickly respond to that. So you're right. Many planners would jump straight in and apply a tenacity assessment. But in my experience, having specialised in this in the last 8 years with under the tutelage of Dr. Richard Lamb, we often would decide at a site whether or not it was even valid. And in our understanding of the sort of preamble in tenacity, as I mentioned before, there's a paragraph just before he launches into his threshold steps. And obviously, you have to meet one threshold in order to proceed to the next. So the first threshold is actually to decide whether or not the likely potential view loss is of any great quantity or quality. And as I mentioned earlier, in my opinion, the low and minor amount of foreground undifferentiated water, which really is a minor part of just the foreground view, it certainly doesn't have any great impact on the wider, expansive and iconic elements in the view. I didn't think that it was warranted at this stage. I think in my report I do say, though, as a conservative approach in the conclusions, if we were to apply the tenacity assessment, in my opinion, it would find that the likely view sharing outcomes are quite reasonable, given that the extent of potential view loss is negligible. So that's my understanding of how the principle should be applied. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask then for our next submitter? Mr. Anthony L. Azori, are you wishing somebody else to respond, or the architect, or just you're on mute? Someone's on mute. I just need to hear from the applicant's team.
Yes.
Mr. Cady, what's happening?
I'm here.
Yep,
Can you hear me?
thank you.
Yep.
I can
Great.
now.
Excellent. Unless there's, I think in relation to the question of view loss and view sharing, I'll add just two further points. Not only were the montages prepared based on images from those respective properties and that demonstrate the extent of the new development in context of the existing development, the elevations and sections also detail quite clearly the amount of reduced obstruction to the view line. So whilst the new development does have a non-compliant element, the a fully compliant development, which would extend at that particular level from east to west at 1.5 setbacks on each side, would actually have a greater view impact than this non-complying outcome, because the design quite intelligently limits the expanse from an east to west axis of that upper level, which actually opens up a view corridor not currently enjoyed by the residents of 200 Carrabba or all the surrounding public areas. So there's actually an additional view corridor opened up as a result of this development. And that's highlighted in yellow in the elevations and sections that form part of this development application. So whilst the montaging or the analysis that was done did actually juxtapose the proposed development in context of the existing development and limited itself to the overall height of the existing development, it went one step further to actually improve the views by reducing the extent of level 5 and provide those view corridors that otherwise would not exist, and also improve the setback on the eastern side to the compliant 1.5, which improves the current situation as well and provides for a greater corridor through there. So on that point, I think it's just important to note not only where there may be some minor encroachments onto the views, but where the views have actually improved. And I think they've been really well highlighted on those plans. In terms of the questions relating to the overall size of the development and the 4.6, I'd probably highlight as well the vast improvement between the existing set of circumstances of the existing dwelling and the proposed development. There's a significant increase of landscaping, a reduction of unbuilt upon area, and site coverage, and those are all benefits that the development has. Again, that the development in its form really started off with determining what was the best way of improving or maintaining the views, not just, I guess, designing it and hoping for the best. So I just wanted to highlight those few points because I think it's important as a result of this development. The other point I'd like to make is obviously there are 2 areas of encroachment, or potentially 3 if the chimney is taken into account, one of which obviously has no impact on views, and that's the arched awning over level 4 or level 3, depending on that's the voided area, and that's essentially a extrusion off the upper level of level 4 to provide that architectural featuring from the views from the water point. Whilst technically non-compliant in terms of its height position at that point, it certainly doesn't interfere with the views. And in terms of where there is that additional non-compliance or that element of non-compliance, we're talking about a couple of 100 mil at a leading edge on the southern end. As I said, in the context of the overall proposal, the portion of built form that actually improves the view far outweighs anything that is non-compliant. So just, again, it's important to obviously consider that where a complying development may actually result in a worse outcome than what is a non-compliant outcome, but provides for a better objective-based one. So I just wanted to highlight those few points. And again, just open it back up to the panel if there's any further questions of any of our team that are online. Obviously, we'd love to answer those.
Very well. Yes, I presume there will be some questions. Mr. Cady, are you online still?
Yes, I am.
Yep. So when I look at your clause 4.6, you've relied on the fact that it's been determined that a tenacity assessment is not required.
Yes, we deferred to Urbis as the specialist engaged on that matter.
Can I just ask you one question here? How many times have you not done a tenacity test when there's been views involved and relied on another preliminary assessment?
Oh, look, I mean, the common approach is to do a tenacity assessment.
But have you actually ever done one saying a tenacity test is not required?
Oh, yes. In circumstances where it's deemed that there is no material loss of views, I have commonly, as a planner, concluded there is no need to go into tenacity because there is no view loss to be considered, or no material view loss to be considered, and that you would go to tenacity as a a methodology for appraising the significance or otherwise of a view loss. But when there is not a material view loss in the first instance, you would not normally go to tenacity.
Okay. And you've done that before?
Yes.
All right then. So can I just inquire as to whether panel members have a question here?
The only thing I would ask, Madam Chair, is I understand that you've actually modified the building in negotiations with council during the design process, and that reduced height in various places. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
The 4.6 was based on the reduced height, as I understand it. I think it was reduced by 200 or 300 millimetres.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Mr. Cady?
Yes, there was a range of measures and discussion of the measurement of the height, and a number. It's hard to describe just one single change. There was a number of minor adjustments made in response to the officer's concerns.
Right. Okay. So let's now move to the architect. Would you like to introduce yourselves and provide your comments?
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Nicola, and I'm an associate at Luigi Rosselli Architects, and I'm here to represent Luigi, who unfortunately can be attending and addressing the panel.
I'll just ask you to move closer to your microphone.
Excuse me?
If you can move closer to the microphone, it would assist.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I hope this works better.
Yep.
Yes, as has been mentioned already, the building has been through minor adjustments to make it more compliant to the DCP controls and the ADP height controls. Due to the topography of the site, of course, it's not easy to work with this condition because there's like a big drop at the back of the site. So the principle that we used to approach the design was to build a new house that was within most of the existing envelope. So when you look at the southern elevation, the non-compliance due by the middle glass balustrade, it is in fact within the existing line of the existing roof. So from a view loss principle, this would not consist in a loss. So the breach of the height would not have a detrimental impact in this point because it's still within the height of the existing building. I can address the concerns about the quality of the design. Of course, yes, we think that the features of the building are part of the character, and we do not want to give up on the main characteristic of the building that defines it. So the awnings and the curved roof. The curved roof, in fact, it's a good outcome because it allows to lower gently towards the edge of the roof, improving the angles of the view in both directions. And another element that Anthony mentioned before about the height breach that just happens on approximately 60% of the width of the site, because on the western part, we actually reduced the effective height from the existing building, and we're actually improving the iconic view towards the Opera House and the bridge and the reserve. So these were aspects that we considered while we sized the project, and we tried to minimize the impact and deliver a quality design that could, of course, be seen from the harbour as a background of the Opera House. So, like all of these components have been carefully thought and Luigi put a lot of his effort into designing this waterfront.
Okay. Do any of the panel have some questions of the architect? Brendan? You're on mute, I'm sorry. You have none? No? Okay, no. Ken? No, and David?
No, thanks.
No. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you the pretty obvious question. What would be the situation if you had to comply with the height limit? How could this be done? Could you still accommodate the curved roof? And is there any way that the architectural integrity could not be interfered with? And if it is, what could be done or what couldn't be done?
We already did some work on this to minimize the impact. So the balustrade the glass balustrade that is 600 mil non-compliant before was full balustrade, and then we decided to change it into glass so to minimize the impact of the non-compliance in height. And then the curved roof, it's also part of the approach. So I guess it becomes difficult to lower the roof and the ceiling of the last floor because it really had a detrimental impact on the quality of the interior space. And so it would become not an habitable room. And if we had to, for example, move back the roof on the last floor to, shrink the room, the benefit that we could provide to the view of the neighbors would be so minor compared to the actual quality of the space, because it would translate in a fraction of like a millimeter of gain of view by just cutting off a meter of building, a meter of the top floor towards the southern end. So that's why we thought that this was a compromise in terms of not giving up on the quality of the building with a minimal loss for the views of the neighbors.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and the threshold question is first of all the clause 4.6. So if you received a condition which said you had to comply with the height, how would you redesign that?
Well, I should probably sit with my client and make sure that what he's happy to give up on, because of course it will be a loss, and there will be, it will be a complicated exercise, and especially when it comes to the awnings on top of the big windows, since they protect from the weather and they define the composition of the main elevation looking toward the arbor. So it's very hard to give a straightforward answer on the spot.
Can I ask a question, Madam Chair? I have to say, when I look at the, can we call them vaults that go across the facade, they're actually against a double height space. I honestly don't see what the difference is if they're lowered to by 600 just to sit within the height. I don't see really the huge impact on the elevation. I'm just sort of looking at it. And I look at the long section, and
So
the difference would be...
Just wait for the question, please.
The difference would be that from the inside of the room, you could probably see the shape of the section more readily when you look out. I'm just wondering, could it be an improvement? When you look at the long section on DA14, and you can imagine you're standing in the living room, and at the end of the room, you actually see the form of the facade. Could it actually be an improvement? I don't know.
or if not an improvement, architecturally, I don't want to venture into saying I don't want to impact on the architectural integrity. But in terms of the clause 4.6, I have to be quite open. The clause 4.6 without a tenacity does concern me, and I was going to ask Jane how often this is done, and I would have thought for insurance purposes you would have done that. I noticed that council officers' report is very thorough in terms of the assessment of tenacity, and they did have the benefit of going into the dwellings in question where the objections have arisen. And in that regard, the panel does have the benefit of the council officers' detailed assessment, with them also having the benefit of being within those unit spaces. Okay, so Jane, if you could respond to just my question about...
Oh, yes, sorry about that. Well, look, as I said earlier, in my experience in the last 8 years, we routinely came across projects where owners or objectors claimed that there would be some significant view loss, and we would attend the site and decide that actually there wasn't. So we would not go ahead on that basis. So that came down to experience and a judgment, I guess. So that's my answer to that, unfortunately. But
okay.
I have to say, we were also, and I still am now, in a COVID situation where it's very, very difficult to get access to places and for people to respond to allow access to inspect views. So recently I've been doing a lot of work using accurate CGIs instead, you know, because we just can't get in easily to be able to do that work.
Yeah, I understand that, and people have been using drones and doing all sorts of things to be able to actually carry that out.
And if I may, Chair, my own assessment was largely informed by looking at the section of the ridge line, and that ridge, which is shown in long section AA, is actually higher than the top of the higher vault, and it is a east-west ridge.
Yeah.
And I made the simple conclusion that as that is an east-west ridge sitting considerably higher than the top of the vaults, the net situation must be positive.
And where is that in your 4.6?
On page 9.
Page 9.
Figure 4.
Just let me find that. I mean, if this wasn't a threshold question, I can see the merits of some of the arguments that have been put forward, but the 4.6 being a threshold question is the difficulty for the panel as I see it.
And so what I've attempted to show there, and I've
sorry, what page was it again? 9?
Page 9, figure 4.
Yep.
And I've highlighted in a blue rectangle the subject area. So in the red, you see the existing building which is to be demolished.
Yep.
And it comes to a peak and drops down with a clerestory window there.
That previously was the leading edge, and now that's been removed.
Correct. Yes. And so by that being higher than the top of the vaults, a view from the north would necessarily have to be improved.
Right, okay then. Thank you. Now, I heard that we had some comments that you wish to make on a couple of the conditions. Before we go to the conditions, I'll just double check with the applicant that with the panel members that they have no further questions.
No further questions.
No?
Nothing from me, no.
Thank you. Okay. All right then, so let's go to that, the condition you raised, I think it was C25, C and D. So could we go to those?
Correct. So basically, obviously, council's raised some issues in relation to those two windows facing southeast, where there's the potential for some privacy issues as a result of those windows. Our submission is in two parts. Firstly, that the existing set of circumstances that the existing building actually has windows in that locality. The other position is that, unfortunately, the neighbouring property as built and the foreshore as built and designed and as it's evolved over a number of years is quite open in nature. So number 3, you would have viewed from your site visit, is essentially a glass box, and it's obviously in and of itself difficult to sort of protect against from a privacy perspective. These windows do sit forward of the building line, obviously because the foreshore building line for number 1 is closer into the water than number 3. So in terms of the potential for, and in terms of the nature of the use of these rooms, one is at the back of a breakfast bar. You would see from the living room floor plans. So they basically sit at the back of a breakfast bar. And the second one is from a low-use bedroom window. We just feel that given that the views to the heads are captured from these two windows, that it would be, from an amenity perspective, quite a significant amenity benefit for the dwelling. But in the context of the privacy, again, given the open nature of the foreshore, given the existing development at number 3 is essentially 95% glazed, in the subject set of circumstances, we think those two windows should have the ability to have, if not be full height, limit any sort of tinting or privacy measure to 1200, just to allow for those views to be captured without there being too much interruption between the two dwellings. Given, just basically in the context of what exists there now, both at number 3 and at number 1. But apart from that, we have no other submissions to make in relation to any of the conditions.
Right, very well, thank you. And is there anything else that the applicant wishes to say before we close this matter?
Yes, thank you. Just in terms of Mr. Randall's question earlier, I'm not sure if we actually addressed it for him. He raised the issue as to whether or not the roof at level 4, those, or as he alludes to it as a vault or vaulted roof, am I correct in, Madam Chair, through you, in terms of whether that's the roof at level 4, that's the awning along the entire width that Mr. Randall's referring to, or is it the double rounded roof at level 5? Because the one at level 4 I didn't think was controversial in terms of its impacts.
I understood it to be at level 5, but we'll clarify that with
It was just looking at, and it was in response to the chairperson's comment on the veracity of the variation. That's looking at the breach of height. When you look at section DA14, it's looking at the vaults, which is sitting above, just above the level floor, the level 5 floor line. And it was a question I think that just needed to be asked. But did you ever look at the idea of sliding those vaults down to sit underneath the 8.5 maximum height? Like,
and we're talking about those at level 5, aren't we, Brendan?
Just
yes,
above the level 5 slab.
It's on the ocean side. It's on the ocean side. It's the screen on the ocean side.
It's just above.
I thought it was these things here that are above the height plane.
That's right, they are. So that's if you look at the 3D modelling that's being done, there's two areas that project. There's one on the roof above level 5, and then there's the one at the floor level of level 5, which sits over the double height area of level 3 and 4.
Yeah, it's the latter. It's the latter.
They could be dropped. I think from an architectural perspective, the intent is that they're an extrapolation of the level 5 floor level to sort of read so that vaulted area is read properly. Otherwise, you end up with essentially a parapet style arrangement behind that. Look, again,
Look,
if,
it is a question that's not saying you're meant to do it.
Yeah.
It's a question that's asking, I suppose that this can just be clarified, what the design intent is, and that you, because what I would want is that the architectural integrity, especially on the harbour side of the house, aligns exactly with what the design intent should be. You know, that it's not, that you're not actually doing things that don't affect the views at all, but do impact on the design integrity of the building. But
from our original looks through, from our original design, when we did look at this, and obviously we spent a lot of time trying to minimise any and eradicate any breach of the height plane. And I'll let Nicola talk to this, but obviously in the context that it did have no impact, whether by way of view loss or overshadowing or anything, the architectural design intent was to leave them at that level, and that was to preserve the overall aesthetic. But if the panel's minded, I think Nicola would be better positioned to talk to that point than I am.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to quickly address that. So the intent of the design of these concrete vaults was to have a hat that was like laying on top of it, flying, and not part of the composition of the glazed box. So as you can see, we have a clear distinction between the solid podium, and then we have a more translucent and transparent place, which is the living room. And then on top of that, like flying, just four concrete vaults that was detached from the main glass volume, and then further back the fifth level with a bigger setback that was using the same vaulted language. But the thing is that if we had to move those vaults down, then there will be no gap in between the translucent element of the living room, and that will become just a different shape that sits on top of the podium.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Very well. So there are no further questions of the panel. The general course is that the panel makes a determination within a matter of days, and then the panel's decision is on the website. As I said, there is the threshold question the panel needs to address, as has been pointed out previously by other people, in terms of the 4.6. Would the applicant wish to respond to the issue of the threshold question of the 4.6?
I would, if I could.
Yes.
I think that there are two matters, and as I see it, they are somewhat separated. There is the view loss question,
yep,
or view sharing question, as I would frame it, and then there is the clause 4.6 tests.
Yep.
My submission is that the clause 4.6 is considered in terms of the objectives, one of which is the view sharing. If there is no loss of views that is exacerbated by the additional height, I would say that there is not a link between the two. And my assessment is that while the subject vaulted awnings project above the height line, they do not contribute to a loss of views relative to the existing building. They do result in a view sharing question in terms of the development of the site in the absence of any condition. I would say in that circumstance, you go to tenacity, and is that effect of the breach significant? And I defer to Jane Mays-Riley on that. But in terms of the existing condition on the site and the existing building form, the vaults are masked by that existing building form. So if you were to imagine the two coexisting or superimposed, so by that test, there is no effect of the breaches. And then looking at strictly in terms of just the control, then you go to the view loss testing of Jane Mays-Riley.
Right, okay, very well. Well, I would like to thank everybody for their participation in this matter this afternoon. And as I said, within a week, our decision, or probably a few days, our decision will be on the website, and everybody will have the benefit of knowing that at the same time. So thank you all very much for your participation. We have noted your concerns about condition 25C and D, and we will discuss that in our deliberations later on. So once again, thank you all, and you're free to leave this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
And I will close the public part of this meeting, and we'll now go into consideration of the next item, which is not required to have a public meeting. Thank you.